Hello, everybody, and welcome to this 14th episode of the Design System Social Club. Today, we're going to be talking about the recent Figma Config 2022, and to talk about it with me, here's Katie. Hey, Katie, how are you doing?
Hi, thanks for having me.
Yeah, well, you're a regular now. But for the people that don't know you yet, Katie is a hybrid designer developer. She's currently working at GitHub on Primer, the design system. She also created the design system at Car Gurus, and she is the co-organizer at Ladies.ux Boston. So again, welcome and thanks for being with us. And we also have Kelly. Hey, Kelly, how are you doing?
Hello.
Kelly leads UX engineering at IDS, which stands for Intuit Design System. She's primarily working on design tokens, and rumor has it that she was also a pro gamer in another life. I'm just gonna keep it at that. And she also co-hosts a brand new podcast about UX engineering. If you want to know more, it's called Code and Pixel, and I think I actually have. There we go. I have the website. So yeah, if you want to hear more about UX engineering, I think it's a great place to go. So thanks, Kelly, for being with us today. And yeah, I will actually maybe share a little bit down the road the URL if people want to check it out. Anyway, also we have somebody that is, I guess, already there from 40 minutes ago, and that's Alan. So Alan, hi. And Alan was there like 40 minutes as long. You're up here. Hey, Alan. And that's great for you to be there. Cool. Well, let's start. So we all love Figma. Disclaimer, we are not so sponsored in any way by Figma, but we all use it. And it's probably our design tool of choice. And this is, there was recently the Figma Config 2022. Maybe the first thing is, how did you feel about it? And in particular, how did you feel about the format, having like basically 24 hours straight of conferences? How does that work for you? Like, what was your, I will share my opinion too, but like what's your take on this? Good format, bad format? What did you think?
It was kind of cool. I only tuned in for the keynote live because I just think keynotes are really fun. And at work, we had like a Slack channel watch party. So it was like kind of fun to see all the new features come out with all my coworkers and get excited about that. But then the rest of the day was a work day. So I ended up not focusing too much on the live talks and then going back and watching them later once they were up on YouTube. So I think it's an interesting concept, maybe not super practical, depending on like if you're able to focus on something like that for an entire day. But
yep. Okay. Kelly, what do you think?
Yeah, it was like same. Like we watched the keynote, but we were also like there. We were the first talk after the keynote, so it was kind of cool to be like watching on camera and like behind the scenes, ready to like go on stage. And they had a watch party there, so it was kind of nice. Like after we finished our talk, we could like go and chill there and watch the talk with other speakers, other Figma employees, and relax and chill because it was very stressful leading up, and afterwards it felt like really nice to kind of be able to soak in and just watch it without worrying. And I think it was kind of cool just seeing like all the folks like ready to queue up and being able like to talk to them and saying, oh yeah, we're going on in like an hour, and like, oh, we're going on in the evening, and just kind of getting a sense of it's just kind of cool to like have it just be like nonstop. And yeah, it's cool. I liked it. And I also, of course, everything was great that it was recorded afterwards too. So
maybe something about it being like live kind of gives it more energy for like a remote event, because it's just always a little bit different than being in person. But if you know it's like actually happening in real time, I think it's a little bit more engaging somehow.
Yeah, I actually didn't know it was live, so I learned something already. So, but I'm wondering if it means that all of it was live or not. Like it's
well, some were pre-recorded, right?
Yeah.
Like not everybody was there in the studio.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, I mean, that's interesting. Well, maybe we should actually continue with that. But before that, I will just give, I mean, I was thinking about like maybe Kelly can tell us about her experience, because as she suggested earlier, she was actually participating, and so we can have like her tell us like what is the behind the scene of like participating in Figma Config. But just to actually, I guess, close the loop on the format itself. Personally, as you mentioned, Katie, I felt like it was a work day because it was 24 hours straight. There was no way that I would actually participate in the whole thing anyway. So it's not like like in other virtual conferences where I actually like took the time off as if I was going to just be there entirely, because I knew I would not anyway do that for Figma Config. So I don't know. Like in the end, I feel like everybody else, I was like watching live the keynotes, or like as much as I could the day of. But at the same time, and we're gonna talk about it also later. But there's like a playlist with all the videos, and there's over 70 different talks. That's a lot, and I don't think I've seen like 10% of it or something like that now. So like at the same time, I get it, and because I'm French, I like the fact that they try to be global and they try to actually have something going on at any given time. So that was great. But at the same time, I feel like there was no way that, I mean, I hope nobody actually stayed the 24 hours straight. That would be a little bit unhealthy, I think. But yeah, anyway, pros and cons. I think like, is it like my favorite format? I guess not, but at the same time, I feel like that was, an interesting concept, and there's definitely like pros and cons about it. Anyway, Kelly, tell us everything from the beginning. Like, who actually in your team? Because you presented a plugin that you created at Intuit for IDS, and you showed that plugin, and it was awesome, and it was the first, the second talk or the second video or the second live that day, but the first real talk outside of the keynote. So tell us, like who actually, I'm guessing like one of you actually, like try to make it happen, and then what? So please tell us all.
yeah, so Damien Borba, who's our principal product manager for the Intuit design system, he's been kind of leading the work on features and what we're prioritizing for our plugin. And he saw the call for proposals for talks for config, and so he kind of gathered the team around and said this is a great opportunity for us to kind of showcase what we're kind of working on and what kind of problems we're solving for not just our internal team, but like the broader organization as a whole, and then eventually to everyone via open source. And so we kind of got together and tried to tell a compelling narrative around all of these things that we're solving for, and what would make our talk unique, because I know like everyone's making Figma plugins and everyone's using Figma, and so what could make us stand out. So we collaborated, we put a proposal, an abstract together, we submitted it, and we were chosen. We're like, yay. So then once that happened, we were trying to figure out what is the best format and way that we wanted to present, because we all kind of have different levels of involvement with the plugin. Myself, I'm more on like the design token side and how that kind of works with the plugin and the data that drives that. We also wanted like engineering presence for the actual literal code being written that powers the plugin, and we wanted that customer problem empathy aspect as well. So once we kind of identified what are the different stories we wanted to tell, we kind of then laid out like who would be talking about what topic and pacing and how many slides and what format. Do we use Figma? Do we use Google Slides? Like it was a whole thing. And so we're trying to, even logistics, like do we have it as like one presentation? Does everyone have their own separate ones? How do we stitch them together? Do we do transitions? Every possible thing that sounds simple, it's trying to get everyone to agree on what we're doing. But we ultimately just like talked through it. We made the call on like how we wanted to break apart the work. And so for the most part, we had Damien focusing on that customer problem. We had me talking about like the design token, design strategy, and then we had Kelvin Wynn, who is our engineering manager, kind of talk about how, you know, we have all these pieces and then like the engineering aspect of putting it all together. And what was interesting was when we got there, we realized that we were one of the few teams that had a very linear type of presentation, and the other presentations were all more conversational. So that was a very interesting logistical thing to figure out in terms of like, where are we standing? Who has a mic? Who's walking on stage? Who has the clicker? So there were lots of things that we had to kind of work through, but the production staff, everyone at Figma was absolutely fantastic and really accommodating, and they were great to work with. It was super professional, super, and I was like, oh my goodness, there's so many things to keep track of, but they were on top of it and muting us and like making sure that we were all taken care of, making sure our speaker notes were set up the way that we needed them. So yeah, it was really cool just to see it all come together.
Yeah. Cool. I have a few questions. One is, was that like at Figma directly, or were you like in a production studio or something like that?
It was at Figma on one of their floors.
Okay, cool. And so like like how long before your live were you there? Like how much time of preparation before that?
So the day before we went on, we got to go into the office to see like just how the studio was set up, and we also had to give our entire talk as like a run through, because worst case scenario, if like the absolute worst thing happened, we would have something to show. So it was kind of nerve-wracking, because even though I kept telling myself this is a rehearsal, it could potentially be the thing that gets broadcasted for the actual show. So it was cool. They did hair and makeup for everyone, and you got to chill in the green room. And it was funny because after our rehearsal, I go back into the green room and there's this, someone sitting at the table, and they turn around and they're like, they're like, hey, how's it going? And I'm like, oh, hey, like, cool. And he's like, hey, I'm Dylan. I'm like, oh my goodness, this is the CEO of Figma. I'm like, oh my goodness, hi, I'm Kelly. And it was kind of surreal, because I just wasn't expecting like him to be there and just chilling casually. And he was honestly like one of the nicest people I've ever met, super down to earth, wearing a Figma shirt. So, on brand. Great to see that. And like having that day beforehand just to kind of like work out the nerves was really useful, because then for the actual day I've already done it before, so it flowed a lot better.
It's great. It's good to hear. And yeah, I mean, if I had to pick a CEO that seems to be like pretty chill and laid back, definitely would go with him. So yeah, but it is funny. So on the day of, does it mean like I don't know, like was there like a makeup session or something
Mhm.
like that? Okay, interesting, cool, nice. And so like in the end, everything went well during the live. Is there anything that we didn't see that actually was like something that you were a
Uh,
little bit stressing about?
the folks who were talking right before we went live accidentally took the clicker, so there was a mad scramble to get the clicker back. I mean, you wouldn't have noticed because like it happened in like a second, but that was one moment that kind of made me laugh a little bit. Like, we need the clicker. Where's the who took the clicker? So that was a fun moment. And
Feels like, like the wedding ring just before the ceremony. It's like this one tiny object that you actually need.
I guess the other part is that it the space that we're in, like just being in the right order, like standing in the right places, like there's like tape on the floor, like help guide you. There was just it was just a lot to like be aware of, and like walking, and I'm like, how do I am I walking in a normal way? Is this going to be on camera? Just all these random thoughts of, oh, I hope I don't trip. Like that was my biggest nightmare, is like I trip and I knock over the podium and just the backdrop just collapses. That was just going through my head as I was luckily nothing happened. I got on there. I think I may have repeated a word instead of saying the synonym that was in my head, but other than that, it was fine.
I mean, from the other side, it looked very, very pro and very polished. So congrats on this, because like honestly, I think it was, and it's interesting because I've seen that plugin before, like months before, but I mean, probably like a first version, not as good as it is now, but I thought like the entire presentation was really solid. So congrats and kudos, because I think you, Damien, and Kelvin did a great job at delivering. But yeah,
Thanks.
the
I had that talk just going every night. I'd go to sleep and I would see the slides just like go through, and I'm like, okay. And I honestly, I didn't really have to look at my speaker notes when I went up there. Like I had it down to the point where I think I could give it right now, just blind, and because I've said it so many times, but it was good. Like I felt more confident every time I said it, and even down to the wire, like leading right up to it, I was tweaking like random prepositions and making sure I said like the right words. It was one of those things where I'm glad it came off as natural, but it was anything but when I was just so anxious.
That's probably why you came off as natural, because you put in so much work to practice ahead of time, which I think is really impressive.
Yeah.
Kelly, was this one of your first in-person talks, or have you done something similar to this in the past?
I've done stuff like this similar in the past, but not since this is my first one since like
post-COVID. I was just curious if you felt like Figma would be like a good place for a first-time speaker to apply and sort of go through this process.
So this was actually pretty unique in that there wasn't an audience in front of us. So what it is like we're in a studio space, and there the screens that you're looking at, and a few cameras, but it's only the production staff and of course like the rest of my teammates standing by, and we're all like waiting and queued up, and so there's no one to like look at and nod back. And so I think that's one of the things that was a little different this time, is I'm like, am I funny? Are people laughing? Like, how long do I pause on this? Like, I'm just going to assume people are laughing and, standing ovation. And so it was just, I think it was good if you're someone who was nervous about being watched. And I don't know what the future formats would be, because I just know from this, there just wasn't a live audience watching. But I'm someone who needs that validation of like nodding along. So that I would say like that was the main difference for me compared to like other more traditional live experiences.
Yeah, I can see how like not having the feedback of an audience can be as unsettling for sure. So
I needed a laugh track is what I need.
Oh my God. Imagine if they had done that.
I think Sarah Drassner actually had something like that for one of her talks, and I absolutely loved it because it just brought this extra level of, it was just funny because we're in the audience as well. So just like hearing a laugh track and then us laughing along with the laugh track was pretty funny.
Yeah. Well, maybe like to continue on Katie's prompt, would you have like any tips or recommendation of somebody that either wants to apply next year or actually is, like going to an event like that? Like, now that you have that experience, what did you wish you knew, once you were doing it, or now that you've done it? Do you have any suggestions?
I would say, like, if you're putting together your abstract, your proposal for what you're talking about, like hit on the key parts that would make your talk different than others. Because I think a lot of the talks did have common problems, but potential like unique solutions and like levels of detail. So just try and be very clear on like what you're willing to share and what the audience takeaways would be.
Okay, cool. Thanks. Well, thanks again for sharing your experience. I think it's super fun to hear like the behind the scenes. Maybe like to change it up a little bit, but we talked briefly about the fact that we were all super interested in hearing the different new features. But maybe we can talk about our personal favorite. Like, what did you get out of it? Like, what gets you most excited about the new features in Figma now with Config 2022?
I have a tiny one. I mean, the absolute positioning, I really love. Like, I feel like almost out of everything that they've announced, that's the one that I've kind of used the most, I guess, because it's just so handy. And it lets you kind of remove a lot of maybe little hacks that you like spacer GIF. I always had a little like group that's called Spacer 2010. Like the old web design days. But yeah, I've used that one a lot. I think it's such a nice little feature that we probably should have had a while ago, but it kind of just makes sense to have it now.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, to me, like this is basically what makes auto layout actually much more useful, because for the longest time, like, yeah, but I want to put something on top of it. Like, how do I do that? So I totally agree with you. What about you, Kelly?
I really like the FigJam integrations. Like when Dylan was showing, like, I think it was like Jira integrations and like GitHub issues. I was like, this is what I've been needing, because, we always have this like planned path for how people should work, but then people don't really use the planned path. So I think this is like a great, like, for people who want to stay in Figma all day, great, like now you can. And so like just all those extra integrations, I think, is like a great way of like meeting people where they're at. And so I love that. And I was actually playing around with some of those integrations earlier. I was like, oh, this is so cool.
I was about to ask, did you actually use it, or like in a real use case, like with your team, or not yet?
Not yet. Just playing around and seeing what I can do.
Okay. What about you, Katie? Did you put anything already in good use?
No, I have not created any GitHub issues yet from Figma, but I have played with it. Shout out to Cole on my team who built that plugin, by the way. So we all got to see it ahead of time and be excited about it.
So it means that even the company that where actually the creator is not, as like, are you not using it at all, or you feel like
I'm sure other people are using it. I would say I don't spend as much time in Figma as probably many other designers at GitHub. So,
Oh, that's interesting. Okay. And what about like the other features? Because I feel like, like we've seen a lot of new features and they're all cool and everything, but that's funny because maybe I should answer first to my own question. But same thing as you, Katie. I feel like it's obviously like there's great new things, like the props and the revised auto layout that is going to be useful. We know it, but sometimes you get excited by like the not so big announcement like truncation for strings. Like personally, like I was like, ooh, well, that's nice, or like improvement. And I feel like all three of us have been hybrids, so engineers and designers. And one of the things that I'm constantly how can I say that, trying to educate designers about is truncation. And let's say, hey, I don't want to see the best example. I want to see the worst use case when strings are too long is a big one all the time. So I feel like Figma introducing this is actually making it a little bit easier for designers to actually pay attention to those things and also just like implement it directly. So yeah, anyway, I guess my train of thought earlier was about like, okay, a lot of great new things, cool, but we're maintaining like libraries that potentially have a lot of components, a lot of occurrences and stuff like that. Any of you actually like implemented new stuff yet? And what's your experience if you did?
a little bit. I think like something that I started to research after this release of like component props and variants and the difference between the two is like, what are people doing? Do people already have different versions of their library? Like, obviously we have versions within Figma, but it's just not really the same thing as like a code version of a library where you can have like a breaking change and create like helpers to upgrade things. It's very like, it's a very breaking change, or it's a new thing that has no impact on the old stuff. And I haven't quite figured out like what the best avenue is to fully update things. But basically what we've done so far is just started to kind of play with some of the new functionality. And then I think those things are going to kind of coexist. So maybe you have like a new form field component that coexists with a deprecated one, because there's not really, from my experience, a great way to like swap those instances for people. But then also, like, do you need that in Figma? Like, are people maintaining like long-term Figma files that need upgrades, or could they just get the new stuff when they like create a new file going forward? I don't really know. I think that's kind of an open question for a lot of people.
Yep. Well, I mean, same thing for us. It's basically like, it's always a question to know if, everything that you put is every new feature or every change that you made on the library is like, and you will start to use it on your next Figma file, like a new file will actually get it. But the old one is kind of like hard to tell on a daily basis, or like the case by case, actually. Let's say, maybe you want it, maybe you don't. I don't know for yourself. So like, it's actually, try to make sense of it, and who is going to actually use it the day you launch it is sometimes like, I don't know. I don't have like a silver bullet answer to that, for sure. What about you, Kelly?
As far as like I actually was really excited about the truncation thing, because I was like, wait, has that been here this whole time? So I was very excited about that. One of the pain points that I experienced that I wish had been included is individual border control, because that is very frustrating of how to communicate that type of customization, or like that type of control. And I think I saw on Twitter someone had posted, what's your approach to bottom border for a Figma component? And like everyone had like different approaches. Like someone had like, they used box shadow, and then like another person had like, oh, I just have I put a frame within a frame, and I just do like some like negative spacing margin. I was like, oh well, that's different. And so like I think just more parity with some of the stuff. I mean, truncation's part of that, right? Like text overflow. So just adding in more of that parity with what Figma can support, I think help.
No, for sure. And it's interesting because philosophically, I feel like Figma is always playing catch up with the real thing, right? So it's all about like, okay, how Figma can actually fake the thing that ultimately is going to happen because, and I said it before, I said it again, Figma is just like building pretty picture, but it's not code and it's not what ultimately your user will experience. So, which is also interesting to me is that like Figma is not particularly a design tool just for web, but it actually is closer and closer to things that you can do in CSS versus like, I don't know, like iOS or Android or things like that. At the same time, I can understand that CSS and HTML and, you know, like all those things are web standards, and it's not like particularly like proprietary code the way that Android or iOS is. So that makes sense that they would follow a standard, you know, as opposed to something else. But at the same time, I just find it interesting how they're always like playing catch up to try to basically emulate what's happening with code directly.
It's probably hard to keep up now when you think about like how much new CSS features are coming out these days
and how powerful they are.
Right? Yeah, it's going to be more challenging for them to keep up.
Yeah, because as far as I understood it's basically like Figma is just doing all in the Canva. So they're just like reinventing the wheel in some ways inside of Canva. So anyway, yeah. On my end, the experience with my team is that we've been looking at actually, yes, like starting to replace certain components variants with the component props. One of the reason is in that was actually pretty urgent for us, is that we were starting to have memory usage issues. Like the file was basically too big, and that was because we had like particularly like a modal component that had like hundreds of variants or something like that. And so trying to reduce it actually made a lot of sense and actually solve our problem with this. That said, we also, and I don't know if you saw that too, but we kind of like, in the end, like stumbled upon the fact that, and again, that's my team. I didn't play with it directly, but apparently the problem with component props is that if you have a nested component inside of your component, you don't have direct access to those component props at the child level. And so that is kind of like a bit too bad for the designer experience, because then they have to like, I guess, like click inside and things like that for them to show up, which is probably not what we want to do. So in the end, we're like, okay, so maybe sometimes we cannot really use component props everywhere, and we actually have to make sure that it makes sense in the end for what we're trying to do. Did you experience things like that?
That was a struggle for me, for sure. I feel like when I was building some form components, I was kind of like going backwards and forwards constantly to try and figure out where I should be using properties versus variants, and like testing it to see. Sometimes it felt like I could get them to go up to the surface level, and sometimes I couldn't. I don't really know why. It was just throwing stuff at the wall to see what works. But they have, whenever Figma releases a new feature, they have those like playground files that you can copy. And there's a really good slide in the playground for variants and properties. It's just like a chart that's like when to use a variant, when to use a property. And it's pretty explicit. So I kind of just followed that and found that to be helpful, but I was still sort of like experimenting and going back and forth with things a lot.
Yeah, I mean, and that also basically to me like brings another topic, is that trying to figure out if it's the right moment for you as a maintainer of, you know, like a large design system or a large library. Is it the right time for me to actually implement this feature, or should I wait for when it's updated, and so I don't have to do it at twice because like I have a feeling that it's nice, but it feels a little bit like first version. And should I wait, before I actually implement this thing? Because ultimately, I think like I, to me, like the how can I say that? The tipping point is always like, okay, cool, it's fun to play with it on my own, or it's fun to play with it when like I have a small library that I'm the only one like basically contributing to. But if you have like several maintainers, contributors, having like changing the way you do things is actually not trivial, and it's going to take a while to actually like change the way we do things or change processes and make sure that everybody is on the same page. So yeah, I mean, plus the fact that, as you mentioned, I mean, Katie, also is the fact that one thing is to make it possible, the other one is to actually make it easy to use for your users, because way more than them probably. So like something that you can just like double click on this thing, and then like those things show up on this panel, and then you're good to go, might fly or not. So it's definitely not trivial. Kelly, what's your experience so far with the new stuff on your end?
I haven't gotten a chance to really dive too deep into the component prop and variant work yet. One of the things that I think will be interesting is, according to how a component got coded, it might be different than what a designer might think the logic would be. An example that I recently went through was, if you have a button and then you have like an icon on the left or an icon on the right, in Figma, it's like the icon's there, but it's like hidden in a variant. And so it's like, oh, for a designer, it's like, oh, this configuration is like a, variant or prop. Like that could be done differently in the code. So when you're working with when you're listing out your design token values, it could be very different because you're assuming that something will be there in the code, but really the implementation had a completely different setup. So at Figma, it's like, oh, this is like 2 pixels in relation to this object that you can't see, but in code, it's really like 8 pixels because that thing doesn't really exist. So that was like a fun little journey that I went through very recently, working on button tokens and relating it back to Figma. So I think there's going to be, based on the work that teams are doing and updating their Figma models to use these variants, I think it's a good opportunity to step back, check how a component is being implemented in code, and then try and work from there, so that ideally you're working with the same design token values. So you're not having to do a weird transform and have, like in Figma, it's this, and in code, it's this other value, because that can get very confusing very quickly.
Yeah, I bet. But that also basically imply the fact that it's the same person that is going to look at the implementation in web and in Figma, which may or may not be the case in your team. But yeah, I mean, personally, like the more I think about it, the more I feel like the Figma implementation is just in parallel with the other platforms. So it's like, like once you have the spec for a component, implementing it in a Figma library is pretty much the same, like more and more is the same as implementing it in your web library or your iOS library or your Android library, or even like for us anyway, our email library, because like this is like it's starting to be like more and more technical, and also like closer and closer actually to how you do things here and there. So obviously, I agree with you that on top of it, and maybe it's probably like the thing that we're going to talk next, is that if you want to use tokens, then they should be exactly the same everywhere. Otherwise, it's going to be even more a pain, for sure. Well, great transition. One thing that I think it was kind of like interesting is that there was great talks actually about Figma plugins and around how do you implement design tokens. So my question to you is, I guess, like, are you using plugins right now to figure out like this part of the work? and also because I feel for me like this is the one thing that is now missing in Figma. But what are the things you feel what is missing? So tokens is mine personally, but if you feel like there's also other things that are missing, I'm curious to hear what are your thoughts on what's next for Figma exactly.
I think tokens are the thing for me as well. And I have to imagine, if Figma is seeing all these amazing plugins being built to tackle the same sort of problem, they must be working on a solution, I would hope.
Yeah.
But that's definitely a pain point that we experience. And I've played around a little bit with Jan's plugin. He gave a talk. He also works at GitHub.
Yeah.
And it's amazing to be able to like have that design data in Figma and hook it into like an artboard or attach it to something, but it's still like not having spacing tokens in Figma is like, really? Like it seems like really critical, but I don't know. I guess I have faith that they will eventually add it.
Well, I remember when you couldn't copy the border radius for an attribute, and I had to manually change all of that. So look how far we've come.
Yeah. Thanks, Figma.
Thank you. So yeah, I believe.
Yeah, but at the same time, I feel like for me, it's like first of all is like again, like managing a design system. It's how much are you going to invest exactly in a plugin, like either actually building your own plugin or actually using, like the awesome, and now like there's awesome design tokens plugins that exist, and like obviously like what's the name of Jan's plugin?
Figma tokens.
Yeah, I mean, like you look at the talk, you're like, yeah, this is what I want, this is what I need. But like either using this, and that is not trivial if you want to implement that in your library, or building your own plugin with the risk that tomorrow Figma is going to say, hey, no, we're natively supporting those things. So I feel like we're in this weird situation where you're like, should I invest in something? Should I wait a little bit longer, see what happens? Because I know for a fact that Figma is working on this. And also like now that plugins are better and better and more powerful, it's almost like, are you just going to buy it or what's?
I was wondering that too.
Yeah,
I was thinking about this earlier. Like I was kind of thinking when you think about like from an engineering perspective in a library, if you want to bring in an external library for something, that's always a little controversial. It's like, you should probably have a good reason. How big is it? Are you going to ship it to people? Like, is it being maintained? Like there's so much thought that goes into it when you do that on a team. But in Figma, it feels like anything goes. Like it's very like easy to add a plugin to your file. Basically, I think everything is sort of file based for the most part, at least in my experience. Yep. It's pretty low risk. And for the Figma tokens plugin in particular, it's giving you like JSON data. So you can take that data and use it in code or use it in, I'm assuming you could use it in Figma in the future if they kind of integrate that natively. So I think it's worth it to invest in it now, because whatever you build or use, I feel like you'll be able to use in some other capacity later. It seems, I don't know. I think it's pretty simple, especially the Figma tokens plugin is pretty low risk. I haven't really investigated anything like around actual components. That's what that one's just tokens. So I don't know.
What do you think, Kelly?
I think we should be the plugin we wish we had. Human plugins. No, because when you think about it, it's like, oh, I wish something worked, and like that doesn't exist. So then that becomes part of your task and job responsibility and role. So I think like at the end of the day, there's like a balance between like human responsibility and know-how, and there's the tooling aspect that goes with it. Because, for example, if someone, I think Christoph mentioned this before, like the handoff or the communication aspect, like, yes, there could be a tool that handles that. Or could a person do that? If there is no tool that does what is needed for that transition. So I think we're at this space right now where everyone's like, is there a plugin for this? Is there a plugin for that? And it would be nice if we kind of like took a step back and go, do we need a plugin? Can we solve this in a human way instead? And I think that's like one. I like thinking about things like that because otherwise you just start investing, hours, days, sprints, all these things, and you wake up and you're going, wait, a person could have done this instead. So it's like that thing where you spend 10 hours doing a task that would have taken 20 minutes to like automate it, but you only had to do it one time. I think about that a lot.
Yeah. Well, yes. The other thing that I'm thinking about is that I think it's still the case, but you have a limitation with Figma plugins is that you can only have one at the same time. So, obviously, if you choose to have and at the same time, I don't know, I'm just thinking about Figma tokens example, but I highly doubt that anybody but maintainers of a library would actually use that every day. So it's probably just for us maintainers to have this on all the time, but probably for our users, it's less of a problem. But I was just thinking how having a design token native support inside of Figma would actually free your one plugin open, because then it's always there, something like that. So, and the other thing that I'm thinking about is the optics of, let's say tomorrow Figma is launching this new capacity. What is the optics of hey, great job everybody who worked on your Figma plugin or something like that, but now you can put it on the shelf because we have it now. So I don't know. It's obviously Figma is great because also of the community behind it. So I feel like there's almost a diplomatic part of it. Is that okay? So now how do you solve for it? Anyway, I guess time will tell. But it is an interesting concept. Okay, so apart from token support, what is the one thing that you wish Figma would handle better, or a feature that they don't have yet? And by the way, I thought it was so funny that when they presented dark mode for Figma, I heard several times, oh, that was the feature that was most requested by everybody. I personally couldn't care less. So it's I guess I'm not the target audience, because I'm cool. I get it. It can be useful, but honestly, compared to I don't know, the shopping list that I have, this is not on the top 5 for sure. So anyway, how about you?
For me, I still can't find anything. I can't find anything. I go to a workspace and I just want to search and I can't search. And I'm going how am I supposed? I have to I'm glad I'm one of those people where I'm glad I can usually spot Waldo, because that's what I'm doing when I'm searching for a file in Figma. I'm that's the file I need, because I desperately wish searching for files and what I'm needing to find, files, libraries, I just wish the search was better.
I will +1 this big time. And this is also a field where all of our companies that have enough people and enough firepower, we're basically developing solutions and tools around the shortcomings of the tools that we're using. So definitely, to a certain extent, I feel the plugin that you presented, Kelly, is also a way to actually search for components in your library instead of doing the search in Figma. So that's exactly what we're talking about. It's don't use that thing. We have better. So whether it's better because it's tailored to your needs at your company, or just because the experience of the original tool is not that great. And I must agree with you that the search experience inside of Figma is not that great for now. Katie, what about you?
Other than tokens, because that's the main thing, I think I don't know, I need more guidance from Figma, or just an improved experience around breaking changes and releasing and updating. How do we update these massive libraries that we've built to use component props in a in some way, in a breaking way, in a non-breaking way, give us some like path forward of how we should be updating our libraries.
Yeah, and there has been, I feel, improvement. So like they're thinking about it, because like, for example, you can select certain things to publish and things like that.
Yes.
The branching also is starting to be. It's so funny because I feel, again, I know all three of us have like experience on the developer side, so like branching is nothing new for developers, obviously. But at the same time, I was actually, like, just positively surprised how quickly designers on my team were like, "Oh, cool, branching, like I get it, like this is convenient," and stuff like that, because like it also reminds me of like the old time of Sketch and different abstract and all that jazz. But I actually feel like people get it, and even like people who was are not developers or don't necessarily have like any previous experience in that. But yeah, that experience, I agree with you, could be improved. But at the same time, again, I feel like there has been improvement in that area. That said, I don't know about you, but like creating branches is also a memory issue down the line. So you have to be careful also about your file size, because otherwise it starts to be a little bit too big. Anyway, cool. Well, we've been chatting for over 50 minutes, but I feel like there's one topic that we didn't talk yet. As I mentioned, there were a lot of talks. And so maybe we can finish by talking about like our favorite ones. So yeah, I just, like, this is the playlist, the Config 2022. So if anybody wants to catch up on anything, you have everything. And there's currently 72 videos. So that's a lot. Maybe we can finish by thinking about, or maybe telling, what are our favorite, like, what are the talks that you particularly liked? Who wants to go first?
I can start.
Yeah.
I want to shout out Yali's talk. So Yali is a design manager on my team, and her talk was all about design ops. I think, like, as a design systems person, I definitely was drawn to all of the design system talks first. So if it had like design system in the title, I was like, I want to review that one. But Yali's talk is really interesting, and I saw a lot of parallels between design ops and design systems, or being like a hybrid designer developer. There's one slide of hers that she says, define systems and processes that don't need you to function. And that is like such a design systems way of thinking. Like, what happens if you go on vacation? Is the system that you built just gonna fall apart? So she kind of goes over that. She gives a lot of actionable ideas for design ops. She talks about, like, are you actually a design ops person and you don't realize that you're doing that work on top of your other work? Just so much like hybrid kind of stuff in there. So I really enjoyed it, and I highly recommend it to other hybrids or people in design systems.
Yeah, I mean, it made a lot of sense for me. Like, there's clearly a lot of overlapping between design ops and design system in general. So yeah, cool. Thanks for the call out. Kelly, do you have? Obviously, we're not counting yours because it was the best. So yeah. The second best. What would be that for you, Kelly?
I really liked, there's a presentation from the folks who work on the booking.com, the design system, Nicole and Alexi. And I really love the transparency of how they walk through their process. It was like very transparent. It wasn't like, oh, in theory, this is how it could work. It was literally showing how they look at files, how they separate things out, what their actual, their documentation site actually looks like, and how it's plugged into Figma. And I also really liked how they talked about hacks that they did. Like, they're still figuring it out. They're still like trying to support things that they really probably shouldn't be supporting, but they have to. And so I just really appreciated that honesty about what they're trying to do. And I think the part that made me pause was they're talking about how they roll out Figma library updates. And they were like, yeah, and then we roll out those Figma updates on Fridays. And I was like, wait, you never push to production on Fridays. Have you learned nothing? So I was just like, wow, like Fridays, okay, like ambitious, like good for you. And I was like, man, maybe they have it figured out. They have that kind of confidence, or maybe they're scrambling every weekend. I don't know, but that was the one thing that made my, I like looked up, I was like, wait, did I hear that right? So I thought that was a fun detail.
Definitely. Or maybe we're just being scarred by, like battle stories on Fridays. So, but yeah, I hear you. I had basically the same reaction, I feel. Cool. On my side, and maybe that's the, design system manager in me, but I actually really enjoyed this talk by Haley Hughes on trust between teams. I think it's, super important. And there was like all this talk about like a team of teams and how do you actually make sure that you work efficiently all together. And God knows that a design system is, a hyper cross-functional effort where everybody needs to talk and trust each other. So I thought it was a very interesting take and a very interesting talk. And I will probably go back to it from time to time to just like listen again and making sure that, like I got it right. So that's one. And just because I'm going to shout out another one because it has been kind of like a project that has been on my mind and on the roadmap in my team, but creating a design system using Figma and some kind of headless CMS. So that team is using Sanity. And I thought it was very interesting because that's kind of like the end goal for me is to have some kind of documentation framework where you can have like a headless CMS that can be surfaced in different places and things like that. So yeah, I thought that talk was super interesting in that regard. Might be a little bit niche, but I feel like that's probably, like for the longest time, I feel like a lot of people were trying to figure out how to deal with design tokens and the design token management tools and things like that. I want to say that documentation framework is probably like the next big thing and for like handling properly a design system is that, okay, a website is nice, but it doesn't solve all of your problems, far from it. And so for me, like having an approach where you do have a headless CMS seems to be like super interesting and I want to invest more time. So again, another talk that I thought was super interesting and potentially something that I'll come back to when I'm more in the weeds of figuring out what we want to do with this. Anyway, I think, we're approaching the hour and I think it's been a great talk. And personally, I think we covered all the things that I wanted to talk about, but Kelly, Katie, is there anything that you want to, I don't know, last question, last piece of comment around the Figma Config 2022?
No, I thought this was awesome. I feel better now that I've gotten to like chat with some other people in depth about how the whole event went and some of the new features. So I'm just thankful to Figma for putting out new features like this and giving us a really cool event and giving people an opportunity to speak about their work and their teams. Yep. Super exciting.
Yeah, great. Kelly, some final thoughts?
Yeah, same. Just was super grateful to be part of the conference and all the cool people I got to meet. And thanks, Christoph, for having us on and talk about it.
Yeah, of course. Great. Well, next month I will be on vacation. I'm sorry. So there will be no Design System Social Club in July because I'll be not around. But in August, there's actually a very special one that is coming up. So stay tuned for that. It's going to be something that we've never done before. So I'm excited. And yeah, we'll see how it goes. Until then, thank you very much, Katie, Kelly. That was great talk. And I hope you'll be back on the show again. And until then, as usual, stay fresh, cheese bags. See you around.
Bye.